Hello, classy folks! Welcome to today's episode of The Roman World, which is not going to be about Romans, actually. We're going to get very, very attached to the Carthaginians for a while so that we can feel all of the appropriate feelings when Rome inevitably wipes them off the face of the earth. Yeah. Not the feel-good kind of episode I'd want, but here we are. The name Carthage is a Roman approximation of a Phoenician word Carthagest, which means the new city. This was one of many Phoenician colony cities scattered all across the Mediterranean. The name suggests it's one of the last founded ones, and that does seem to be true. It means the new city. So ignore the noise on this map here because it's all spoilers, but here's Carthage, here's Rome. You will notice that Carthage is positioned incredibly well to circumnavigate the major boundaries standing between it and Rome to deliver a killing blow. This is not lost on Romans either, and their increasing paranoia about Carthage is going to, well, drive many of their actions for the next unit or so. We're looking here at a map of the Eastern and Western Mediterranean. I've kind of superimposed them so you can see them a bit better. Sidon and Tyre are the parent cities for Carthage, and these are twin cities along the coast of the Levant. So the Levant is the strip of land between modern-day Turkey, Anatolia, and Egypt to the south. It's a fertile region backed by mountains and deserts, and because it stands between major empires for most of its history, this is also an area of frequent warfare and general toxicity. But this is also one of the innovation hubs for maritime industry, ship construction, navigation technologies, navigation mathematics. The Phoenicians are all over this. And with the spread of Phoenician traders comes the spread of other Phoenician technologies, including the alphabet that you and I use to write English with. That's derived from the Phoenician alphabet, and the Phoenicians win the alphabet game in this region because they manage to be everywhere and super duper useful. Interestingly, though, they aren't big conquerors in the way Rome is, or say the Persian Empire was. The Phoenicians are much more about having trading outposts next to you and using their economic influence to have their way. Now, this is not to say that economic imperialism is somehow not real imperialism. It totally is. In fact, it's one of the major influences around our modern international community is all about warfare by economic means and economic sanctions and trade deals and so on. So the Phoenicians are, in many ways, the goat. Do you actually say goat or do you spell out G-O-A-T? Let me know. But yeah, they're going hard in for this make trade rather than war model, which is not to say that Phoenicians don't raid, that they do. They're just not as into it as some of their neighbors. And because of their superiority in navigational technology, mapping, and range, a set of knowledge that they managed to keep their hands on pretty closely too, they're able to reach markets that other people can't. And that's partly how they manage to win a position for themselves with economic means. So, looking now from the Eastern Mediterranean to the Western Mediterranean, Carthage is a colony state that itself begins to make its own colonies and trade hubs that are linked into the greater Phoenician family of trading hubs. But these cities look to Carthage for protection, and Carthage is running the trade show from them. We're looking here at Carthage's sphere of influence at the height of the Punic Wars. Actually, this is before the Punic Wars start because they've still got Sardinia and Corsica. And this is their actual occupied land. When you see maps of Carthaginian land, often the map color goes all the way down into Africa north of the Sahara. And this is because that is their effective range. Their allies live inland, including the Numidians, the Mauritanians, a bunch of different cities that are linked by Berber ancestry in this area. Also, Celt Iberia, so the Celts living in what's now Spain, are under Carthaginian influence, and there's some land that's directly held by Carthage, but Carthage's strings extend much deeper into the landmass than their direct occupation shows. So what we're looking at here is a map in the Western Mediterranean of areas where Carthaginian colonists are living and creating cityscapes that can be traced directly to them. So it's a much smaller footprint than their diplomatic footprint. But if you look at this footprint, it illustrates the mechanism as well as the where, because you'll see that they've got these cities dotted along the coast, heavy habitation around this major strait. So the Straits of Gibraltar coming into and out of the Mediterranean. Carthage is sitting on this especially heavy because maintaining superiority in this region keeps other people from going to the Atlantic for Atlantic trade. And that's going to be a major plot point of Carthaginian hijinks in the next couple of centuries. Tethys. Seriously. Sorry, she's growling at her brother Cato. It's going to be relevant, but not quite yet. These are the voyages of two Carthaginian explorers, Hanno and Melco. We don't have their actual writings because Rome destroyed them all, but destroyed doesn't quite get at what Rome actually did. So what Rome did was it captured Carthaginian libraries and then expended a lot of wealth and time in getting those translated into Latin and then subsumed into the Latin academic tradition. Some of it gets into the Greek tradition too. So we have enough information from the Romans who conquered and translated this to be able to talk about individual Carthaginian explorers and how far they got. These are two of many, but Hanno and Melco are responsible for mapping the Atlantic coast of Africa, that's Hanno. Melco maps the Atlantic coast of Europe. And these are the recreated maps of their journeys. Melco was for Mediterranean cultures the discoverer of Ireland, which is not to say that nobody knew where Ireland was. Of course, the Irish people knew. He was just the first person from the Mediterranean to make a voyage there, come back and bring information. So if you're an ancient Roman, you'd be thinking of Melco as the discoverer of Ireland in this very colonialist narrative of exploration that we, of course, have inherited. Hanno, we have a little bit more information about because after Rome takes over Carthage, they expend a lot of effort trying to duplicate this journey and take over Carthaginian trading hubs. Unsuccessfully, by the way, at least not successful in any large-scale way. It seems that the locals were like, hey, you're not the Carthaginians. Oh, you're Romans. You're only here for our ivory and some elephants, aren't you? Which indeed the Romans were. So those trade relationships didn't really go anywhere, but Rome tried at least. Rome also had difficulty replicating the amount of navigation skill required to do this voyage, because once you're out in the Atlantic, you're dealing with ocean tides and ocean weather, which is different than the tides and the weather inside the Mediterranean. You also need much better navigational mathematics and positioning skills. Even Hanno and Melco stayed very close to the coast of Africa and Europe in order to pull these missions off because of this tech gap in navigation away from seacoasts. So regular sailing across the Atlantic, for instance, that wasn't a thing. Not so much because it was totally impossible, but the navigational technology wasn't there yet to make it economically profitable. Probably ancient Greeks and Romans and Phoenicians washed across the Atlantic one time or another, but it wasn't a round trip and it wasn't duplicable. Interestingly, there was a theory of another continent on the other side of the globe. Uh, Ancient Carthaginians and ancient Romans, in fact, everyone in the ancient world believed that the world was round. Those who didn't believe it was round thought, okay, maybe it's like an egg shape or a cylinder. Flat Earth is not a thing in the ancient world because they're maritime cultures. They're on the Mediterranean, and they notice that the horizon is always a little bit above where they're going and that things come into view as if they're coming around a curve. So not only did they know that the world was a globe, but Eratosthenes of Cyrene measured the circumference of the world fairly accurately in the, I think this is what, the 200s BCE? Yeah, he was a nifty dude. He might have been Greco-Berber. He's from North Africa. Really cool guy, but not Carthaginian. So focus, Jones Lewis, focus. Right. So Hanno and Melco created these sea routes that are not only an important source for economic benefit, but eventually become a source of contacts that Carthage can use for military emergencies. So Carthage isn't just Carthage. Carthage is its trading partners. And in many cases, Carthage has a monopoly on these trading partners because nobody else can successfully make these voyages regularly enough to maintain contacts. The African trading route, you'll notice, goes as far south as Mount Cameroon. That's the southernmost identifiable landmark that we can match up to our records of this journey. They may have even gone a little bit further south along the coast of West Africa, but as soon as you're down around the Horn, the currents are such that this is your best place to turn around and go back up north in order to make this a successful and profitable voyage. So this was a route that traded ivory, which was a huge economic product in the ancient world, and also a route that brought live elephants, elephant herders, technical specialists in the care and feeding of elephants, all of which was incredibly important to Carthage's military. You also had gold trading along this route and dye production. Oh, that was embarrassing. Sorry about that. My cats, Cato and Tethys, sometimes don't get along, and it's really embarrassing, but we're working with a cat behavioralist, so sorry. Cato heard me mention Carthage, and he must have gotten excited. That'll make sense later. Now, it's not just the Atlantic sea trade routes that Carthage is creating and maintaining. This chart is taken from the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, which is a fancy name for the sea map of the Red Sea trade routes used in the 1st century CE by Rome. But again, these are trade routes Rome gets when it takes over Carthage, steals their maps, translates them into Latin, and then tries to replicate them. They are more successful in replicating the Red Sea route, and they're also more motivated to replicate the Red Sea route because this allows them access to trade with India, which was another source of elephants, ivory, gold, luxury products like cotton and sugar. Cotton and sugar were very, very rare and very, very sought after. So these are some of the major things coming out of India. Also, people. There was a lot of immigration from India into the Mediterranean beginning in the Hellenistic period, so the end of the 300s into the 200s and 100s BCE. And there are enough Indians living in the Mediterranean that in Pompeii, for instance, we found a statue of Lakshmi in this house that has some other pieces of art and religious stuff that's traceable to India. And this trade route is maintained through the Red Sea route initially mapped by the Phoenicians, and the Carthaginians are part of this process. So this goes down the coast of East Africa as far as Raftha here, onto the Ivory Coast. Romans knew about Madagascar. But also there were multiple ports along southern India, and there was an awareness that over here somewhere-ish was a place they called, here-ish was a place they called Taprobane, or we're pretty sure that Taprobane is Sri Lanka. And then over here, we have an area that the Romans called Thina, which eventually turned to Sina and China. So if you've ever wondered why people from Europe called China China when that's not the word in Chinese, that's why. The Romans did it. It's their fault. The China route, by the way, is not as dependent on Phoenician trade because it is an overland route through the Persian Empire. But by the 1st century, there's enough regular trade coming out of China that Chinese silk appears on the Roman market. But it's like 5th, 6th hand passed down through this early form of what eventually becomes the Silk Road. But the Silk Road isn't the Silk Road until there's this cooling and warming period that allows the Gobi to be a little bit easier to cross than it used to be. At any rate, when you think about Carthage, we're thinking explorers, mathematicians, huge nerds, in other words, who are able to take their nerdery and practically apply it to statecraft in a way that also helps them minimize their military footprint. Did this always make them popular? Well, no. But this means that when Rome goes up against Carthage, there are a lot of reasons not to support Rome in this contest. Rome is not a massive trading hub. Rome, at this period, it's taken over a lot of mainland Italy, but it's not an international military force to be reckoned with. Rome is still kind of nobody. And Carthage has been around for ages. Everyone depends on Phoenician trade. And that's going to make this a very unlikely matchup with a surprise outcome if you don't already know who Rome wins. Sorry. So as I said, Carthaginians can pull on a lot of geographically distant sources for aid when they need it. Economic aid most of the time, but also military aid. So I have here at the top a list of the non-Carthaginian people who fought for the Carthaginian side in the First Punic War. And here I'm going to find them on a map for you. So Gauls are the people living in Northern Europe during this period. It's complicated, we'll just go with that. Ligurians are in southern, Gaul. These are on the coastal area where the Alps meet the Mediterranean Sea. And this is an area where Carthage has a port town that later becomes Marseille, Massilia. This is not yet Roman-owned territory. That doesn't happen until, like 106 BCE. So this is still Carthaginian sympathetic for quite a long time. The Numidians live everywhere in northwest Africa that is not Carthage, or Mauritanians. The Mauritanians are a little different. But Numidia are all of the geographical close neighbors of Carthage, the city, and they supply Carthage's cavalry. That'll be a plot point. Let's see, who do we have next? Libyans are people who live even further inland. So Numidians are coastal. Libyans are also called Garamantians, and they're in this area that's now mostly desert. The Sahara has expanded a lot in the last 2,000 years. Back in the day, there was a lot more savanna grassland with potential for herding and little pockets of intense fertility. So you do have a lot more people living on the African interior of North Africa. And then this, at its furthest southmost point at the Atlas Mountains, there also seems to be a trade route to the Mande peoples in tropical West Africa across the Sahara. So the Sahara is much more navigable during this period. So it's still a major geographical barrier, but it's not as big of a barrier as it is today. So you do have a lot more people coming northwards and settling. Okay, so let's see. The Libyans are people of the Eastern African interior. So basically anybody in Northeast Africa who isn't Egyptian, kind of along this Mediterranean coast, is Libya. And that's another kind of amorphous ethnic term from the ancient world that we're not quite sure what it meant to people, but it does get thrown around a lot. Next, Greeks, or people who speak Greek. So they're not just living here. They also, in the Hellenistic period, occupy Anatolia and the Levant and areas deeper into the Seleucid Empire up to Parthia. Parthia's taken this land back already. And then the Ptolemaic Empire is currently run by Greek speakers. There are a lot of Greek colonies, so the Nile River Valley is another hotspot for people who self-identify as Greek. So Greek means a lot of different things. And I'll just say it, a lot of different things that have nothing to do with skin tone. Modern rules of race are artificial, but also very modern. The idea that people can be color-coded is something that comes out of the 1700s. Ancient people, sure, they noticed that people's skin color varies depending on how hot it is, but that wasn't the first or fifth or even sixth thing they're looking at when they're trying to figure out, okay, what racial category do you fit into? Race for ancient people means your ancestry, how proximate your ancestry is to Greek speakers or Latin speakers. Also, whether or not you live in a city or whether you are a nomadic herder, which to us feels kind of funky because those aren't things you can look at somebody and just see and then make assumptions. This doesn't mean it's not toxic or it's not harmful or that color isn't at play there either. It's just different rules. At any rate, so Greeks, and then finally the Iberians, who are Celtic peoples from modern-day Spain. So if you'll notice, we have now drawn red into everybody but, let's put Rome in blue here. Yeah, so here's Rome, right in the middle of this semicircle of people who don't like Rome very much, all of whom are economic partners with Carthage. Yeah. Now, Rome had been one of Carthage's economic partners and military allies. When Pyrrhus of Epirus was in Italy, you may remember, Carthage was a Roman ally. But things are about to sour, epically so. Before we get there, though, we have to look at Carthage itself. This is an artist's reconstruction of Carthage Harbor, and it's had to be reconstructed because, well, Rome destroyed this. But we've got a pretty good idea of what this looks like. The nifty thing about Carthage Harbor is that the built-up harbor, so let me do this in red. So that's the harbor. Carthage, the city itself, is on a promontory surrounded by these bays on this rocky outcrop of the North African headland that's between the mountainous zones leading out to the Straits of Gibraltar and the sandy sandbars and Saharan outflow on the eastern coast of Africa leading up to Egypt. So it's kind of the last stop that you get between the eastern Mediterranean and the western Mediterranean. But the natural geography protects it from things like storm surges and abnormally high tides and tsunamis for that matter. And then the harbor itself is artificially fortified to make it even more stormproof. In the front, we have the trade harbor. So that's right up to here. And the trade harbor is just what it sounds like. This is for merchants coming in and going out, and the the sea doors and sea walls allow this to be sealed off so that if you go to trade in Carthage, there can be a customs procedure and taxation at the harbor. Then they'll watch your boat for you while you go spend your money in scenic downtown Carthage, where you can do a lot of the things that we see in ancient Rome, right? There's a circus. Here's an amphitheater. And then this is the Acropolis. So this is Carthage's answer to the Capitoline Hill right downtown. Carthage also had a senate, much like Rome. It did not have kings, much like Rome. Governmentally very, very similar, just a different language, different religion, but structurally a lot of things fit. So much so that Romans kind of saw Carthage as like their evil twin, although I guess Carthaginians thought Rome might be their evil twin. If they thought of Rome at all, it kind of takes a while for Carthage to take Rome seriously. Sort of mirror universe Rome, for those of you who like your Star Trek references. Now, there's a second set of sea doors between this lozenge-shaped merchant harbor and this round area here. The round area is Carthage's military harbor, and it's back in here so that you have to break through. If you're attacking it by sea, you have to go through 2 fortified sea gates, one of which is a death trap for invaders, to get into the military harbor. The military harbor is deep inland, so no matter how storm surgy the storm surges get, the boats in this harbor aren't going to be rocked around or destroyed. It's roofed over to protect these ships from storm damage. And this is not so much a quick readiness harbor. Boats would have been actively patrolling the sea lanes here and here. This is rather where your military ships go to get refitted, repaired, upgraded, and it's all walled off. So if you want to see what the Carthaginians are doing to make their new ships of the line more deadly and impressive, you're not going to see that. The Carthaginians control who goes in and who goes out, and it's very difficult to kind of crack this bubble and see what they're up to. More power them. If I'm ever a maritime nation, this is my plan. This is a good plan. This is not what ends up getting Carthage taken out. Sorry, Carthage. So here we are looking at it from another angle. Some of you may recognize the concept art from Rome Total War. This is that. And it's a really good reconstruction of the civilian and military harbors. What I like about this picture is it lets you look into the ship sheds. So if you see along the sea-facing edge, you have ship barn after ship barn. This is because the Mediterranean is infested with wood-eating worms, so the longer you keep your ships in the water, the faster they're going to degrade. This is a real problem for underwater archaeology because ship worms eat a lot of the ships that sunk in the Mediterranean. So even though so many ships sunk, mostly what's left is just the cargo. The wood is gone, unless the wood's been buried in some extra anaerobic mud and the worms just didn't notice. We're finding more and more of those now. Super duper exciting. Right, so when you make repairs, you need to take the ship up out of the water and you need to dry it out to get the ship worms out. So this is where you store your ships. You repair them, you retrofit them, but what this means is that if Carthage loses a bunch of ships, it's got a bunch of extras in its pocket that it can just kind of pull out and send back into its theater. So it's got this deep bucket of ships that it can just keep pulling out of, and they're really good ships. These are state-of-the-art amazing ships, and that's a real problem for Rome because it's not that Rome didn't have any ships at this period, although Roman authors will say, oh, we didn't have any ships until the First Punic War. Archaeology has proven this to be inaccurate, but it's not completely inaccurate. Rome didn't have a lot of ships, and most of what they had were merchant ships, not warships. And they also hadn't done a lot of naval battling, so they also kind of didn't know what they were doing. So they had a steep learning curve, a learning curve that they exaggerate a little bit when they're bragging about it, but a learning curve nonetheless, that Carthage is so ahead of the curve that they're making the curve. So I mentioned that Carthage is on a promontory inside a bay. This is what I mean by that. So there's the location of Carthage. You'll notice it's on this little mini bay here, and there are two mountain promontories sticking into the Mediterranean here and here, protecting folks from the currents off the coast. So if a tsunami comes in, it has to come like almost directly aimed at Carthage to make a dent. If it goes here, it'll bounce. If it goes here, it'll bounce. So this is a pretty nice sea lane if you can get it. Draft, erase, dang you. Okay, you're not erasing. The city of Carthage itself has not one, but like 3 to 5 walls around it. And if you look at the topographical map here, you'll notice that there are mountain ridges coming down to the sea. So Carthage itself is built on this very sturdy, heavy rock projecting into the Mediterranean. So it's protected on all 3 sides by ocean. Well, not ocean, sea, except for this bit, which is a Rocky Mountain Peninsula, so it's not as vulnerable as it looks. And then they built their city walls in 3 layers up to their acropolis, the Byrsa. Let me use blue for this. So the Byrsa here is the highest point in their city with all of their major governmental buildings and their temples. This is their version of the Capitoline Hill. Their marketplace is right down here. So there's their forum, pretty much exactly where Rome's forum is. There's their port, which is much better than Rome's port. And then there's tombs nearer to the sea. Then you've got walls along the seawall here. So if you try to like land marines here and attack Carthage overland, you're going to run into walls. The 3 gates leading to continental Africa from Carthage, here, the Utica Gate, the Thivesti Gate, and the Thapsus Gate, are part of a 3-wall layer. So if you're attacking, you have to bust through 3 contiguous wall layers in order to even get close to actual Carthage's downtown. And then if you want to get to the government buildings, you have to further fight through another wall into the Byrsa. If you want to come by sea, you have to go through 2 sea gates and the entire navy. This place is a fortress. It's a nut that is near impossible to crack. And the fact that Rome has a really hard time cracking it, even in the Third Punic War, says something. And the docudrama I'm having you watch for Quiz 2 includes a scene showing the final sack of Carthage and just how freaking difficult of a fight that was. Carthage was really impressive, and it had to be, because Carthage controlled immense wealth. So they are building a deterrent that is directly related to their place on the international stage. Yeah, they're really wealthy and powerful, but when you're wealthy and powerful, people want your stuff, and people have gripes with you that kind of sit and fester. Okay, so one last thing to know about the Carthaginians, and that's their religion. This is something that Rome went after in a major way as one of their reasons for making Carthage a preferred enemy. And this in itself is really telling, because Rome in general does not tend to go after people's religion. I know that in a world now where one of the major world religions is one that Rome really didn't like, it's easy to forget this, right? One of the few religions Rome tried to suppress was Christianity, but one of the few, right? Temples of Isis were in Rome, temples of Cybele, and it's a very cosmopolitan religious landscape. But they do decide they don't like the major gods of Phoenician culture and Carthage. The ones I'm going to focus on are the Zeus and Hera of the Carthaginian pantheon, Baal Hamon and Tanit. So Baal is the male weather god guy, and Tanit is the female mother goddess lady. And worship of Baal and Tanit allegedly, and this is one that archaeologists are still working on, so it's an open question, but allegedly, the people who are alleging it are Romans, hence the alleged, but some other peoples mention this too, was that in times of great distress, so times of plague, famine, desperate warfare, when the Carthaginians felt that they were in a special state of threat and emergency, their upper class families would sacrifice their young children to Baal and Tanit as a way of averting the catastrophe. And I'm going to start here by making the case for child sacrifice, because I think that's the most respectful way we can enter into this conversation, especially since Rome is so disrespectful of it. But also, I think most of us, including Carthaginians, kind of wince a bit at the thought of sacrificing our children to Baal and Tanit. That's, as a parent, I have to say, this is a very difficult thought that I do recoil from, and I would really not like to do, but we need to contextualize it and give it some credit here. So you're not doing this like every Sunday morning at church, or, every Friday or Saturday or whatever your day of worship is if you have one. This isn't just something that is routinely going on. This is something that happens when your city is in a lot of trouble. So people are about to sack you and enslave your population, or everybody's getting sick from this new disease that just showed up and we don't know what to do, or our harvest was awful, people are dying. So say that you believe that the gods have a reciprocal relationship with you, that if you give them things to thank them, to acknowledge them, to get their attention, and you believe that the quality of that sacrifice matters. So here, using Roman logic, right? You don't pick like your sick bull to sacrifice. You don't pick an old bull. You pick a young bull without blemish that's super perfect and pretty looking, that you've never used for agricultural labor. You give up something that hurts you economically, because the god is going to notice if you went cheap. They'll be like, you killed your old bull. What is this? No, give me your nice young bull, and then we can talk. So if you believe that the gods see how bad the sacrifice hurts you, and if you believe that your animals, your harvest, your health, your children are a gift from the gods, the children are already something that the god gave to you, so they don't rightly belong to you, they belong to the god. And you believe that if you don't do this ritual and the gods don't save you in your final moments of desperation, you are all going to get killed anyway, then it makes a little bit more sense to be like, okay, well, you gave us these children, we trust you so much, we're going to give them back to you, please help. That makes a little bit more sense. It is also telling that one of the things Rome found so creepy about this was not necessarily that human beings were getting killed. After all, the Romans are very okay with human beings getting killed. Roman human beings getting killed, even. They found it objectionable not just that children were being sacrificed, but that it was the children of the upper class. So, like, your own children, not somebody else's children. I mean, that we could understand and respect, but like, what? The powerful people in your society are giving up their own children? And if you think about it, that's kind of a weird line for Rome to draw, since your male head of household could indeed kill his own children, and also you're regularly expected to send your children off to war and death in childbirth and so on. I mean, yeah, they're a little bit older, but it's still your kids. So, looked at in this context, it's kind of an interesting line for Rome to draw, saying that the thing that we find so objectionable about Carthaginians is they sacrifice babies, upper class babies, their own babies. What's up with that? Um, Now, again, I'm not saying that I approve of sacrificing your own upper class babies. Like, seriously, don't call CPS. Jimmy's fine. I'm not a Baal and Tani worshiper, and also, I no. But I get the logic. The logic makes sense by the rules of ancient Mediterranean religion, by human principles. If I'm kind of putting myself into this headspace, like I can see where you get here. And this sacrifice is something that does indeed hurt to give. Hurts a lot more than giving a nice young baby cow. Like, this would indeed be, if I thought of like the number one thing that it would hurt me to give up, yeah, it would be my son. And if you're doing it, not even, yeah, partially to save yourself, but also to save your community, in recognition that your community's existence was imperiled, and that you were willing to be one of the first people to give up something big for the salvation of the whole, and you're one of the people in charge. Like, it's the 1%ers giving up their babies. I do have respect for that. That does make sense to me. And that is my case for child sacrifice here. But I think Rome makes up its mind about Carthage, not on principle, right? When they were allies with Carthage, they presumably knew about the baby sacrifice thing. Rather, once Rome decided that they were going to be Carthage's enemy, they had a problem, a PR problem, because Carthage had money, had friends everywhere because they were trading partners. They had a golden name in transport and industry sectors in the Mediterranean. They were also diplomatically influential, and as such, Rome taking a stand against Carthage was setting itself up for a lot of danger. So, what can you do to convince people not to turn on you when you're in a war with Carthage? Well, you can say, guys, you need to know the truth about Carthage. They murder their own babies. How can you be an ally with that? So, by taking a moral high ground, Rome benefits tactically and um, diplomatically. They're able to pull in an us versus them dynamic from other religious traditions of the Mediterranean that don't have a tradition of child sacrifice, in particular Greek speakers. Not so much the Celts, because the Celts were okay with human sacrifice, and then Romans have gladiators, so come on, Romans, really? At any rate, this is a tactic that does long-term work a little bit, at least in winning hearts and minds for Rome. Also, because Rome at this period was perceived as being less of a threat than Carthage, right? Rome doesn't have Carthage's wealth. Rome doesn't have Carthage's military reach. I mean, Rome has a big standing army, but they don't have 50 bazillion allies like Carthage does, and a bunch of debts they can call in. Rome also doesn't have a huge GDP, and they're kind of new. They've only just gotten their Italian countryside, and winning the war with Pyrrhus was sort of a fluke. So if you have some resentment about Carthage, if you don't like that Carthage is wealthy and controls your port and makes you pay taxes every time you go to their harbor, then you might be like, you know what? We might be better off with Rome. Rome's not going to tax me every time I come to Carthage harbor. So, you know what? I'm going to be Rome's ally, and let's see how this works out for me. Especially with the Numidians, so Carthage's closest neighbors, the non-Phoenician speaking natives, the indigenous peoples of North Africa. There was a kind of side eye at Carthage. I mean, Carthage had for a long time intermarried with North African peoples, so this isn't a situation where Carthaginians are refusing to intermarry and there's any like, ethnic purity. A isn't a thing. B definitely isn't something the Carthaginians are going for here. But there still is a cultural divide. Carthaginians speak their own language, Punic. Numidians speak their own indigenous language, Numidian. And it probably horks them off to no end that the Carthaginians are rich and they send their horses to go fight for Carthage. So to them, they might be like, you know what? Rome doesn't live right next to me on land that they acquired in a sketchy fashion from my ancestors. Maybe Rome will give us a better deal. And that is indeed what Numidia ends up going for. Unfortunately, they can't look forward and see that Rome will do exactly to them what Rome did to Carthage, because that's what Rome does. And I feel bad for picking on them. This isn't something to pick on people for. You make the diplomatic decisions that you have to make amongst an array of less than ideal choices. One last thing I'm going to put onto this lecture, which is already getting a bit long, but this is important before we say goodbye to Carthage entirely. We could tell you a lot more about Carthage, except that Rome makes a concerted effort to wipe them off the map entirely, including their language. We can After a certain point, people couldn't read Phoenician anymore in the ancient world. This is about the 1st century CE, and most people were engaging with Carthaginian through Latin translations. The Carthaginian contribution to science and navigation was already starting to be erased, although it never entirely went away because Rome liked bragging that they'd taken out Carthage. So that's great for us. It means that we know Mago and Himilco's names. Sorry, Hanno and Melco. Mago's a different authority. He's an agricultural scientist. So we can name Carthaginian scientists, and we do know a little bit about their work. But even questions of like how much child sacrifice was there going on anyway, those questions are really hard to answer because Rome does take out Carthage with extreme prejudice. And one of the things I find sort of pressing and unsatisfying about the material in this lecture is that I wish I could tell you more. We are figuring out more from archaeology, but we're looking into the face of a massive erasure of a world empire that at one point was arguably the biggest power in the region, bigger even than Macedonian anything, because even under Alexander, he did conquer Sidon and Tyre, but yeah, I think Carthage, at least for a while, is as big as, say, the Medo-Persian Empire, or the Parthian Empire, or Alexander's Empire, or any of the splinter kingdoms that come after it. And yet, Carthage is very difficult to resurrect because of the events in the next lecture. It's not just Carthage who ends up damaged out of this, though. Rome takes a hit too, and that hit is what we'll be exploring next. And it's kind of a cautionary tale. Beware what wars you win, because winning doesn't always mean that you're gonna have a better life. So, on that note, we'll pause and move on to the Punic Wars. Dun dun dun!